Today we're going to do an unboxing and initial review video on a knife that I just got in. This is my first time I've picked up a knife from this particular brand. This is a Petrified fish knife, which is an interesting name for a brand, I think, but I've heard some good things about them. This is another one of those budget brand knives. I believe it is made in China. Usually these type of knives come in like D2 steel, and they vary in price, usually between $20 to about $40 or so, depending. I have noticed that the Petrified fish knives seem like they're a little bit on the higher end of that price range, closer to the, 40, 50 maybe dollar range, and not so much down at the $20 range, at least right now with prices, what I'm seeing. This particular model, the blade shape was a little bit different, and so that's what kind of attracted me to it. And so I picked this thing up. I've been meaning to pick up a Petrified fish for a while now, just to check out the brand. Like I said, heard some good things. So I want to compare those to some of the other brands. My assumption is this will land somewhere between the Sativians that I've done on the channel and like the Civivis. Those are kind of that same spectrum. The Sativians being kind of on the lower end of that budget brand as far as price point goes, although I've had great success as far as their quality goes. I've not had any issues with the quality on the Sativians. I think they hit way above their price point. And then, of course, the Civivis are now, they've kind of made a name for themselves, and now they're a little bit higher in the price bracket there on that budget knife brand, still getting up more in the $40, $50 range, or sometimes even higher, $60, $70 range. But it does seem like as time goes by, the Civivis are getting a little more expensive as they become more well-known. And that's understandable. They have really good build quality on those knives, being made by We Knives. So you would kind of expect that. But anyway, this is my first Petrified fish, so it kind of lands in that same category. So I'm curious to see what I think about this. The model is the Petrified fish PF9399. Now that is one of my gripes about some of these brands, like say the Sativian. These Chinese brands that don't name their knives, they just give them a model number. That's not very efficient for being able to find one knife from another when you're looking for it. You have to know a model number. It's not like you can say the name and other people in the knife community are going to know what model you're talking about. When you talk about obviously more popular brands like Spyderco's, Benchmade's, some of those other types of brands like that, people might know a model name, but you don't have that option even here, right? Which you'd be less likely to know it anyway, but I'd like to at least have the option. It's easier to say a name than a model number, but this is the PF939. One thing about these models I will mention as we're getting ready to open this here, is that they are getting harder and harder to find. I waited quite a while to go ahead and order one of these, and I think I almost missed my window. I had a hard time finding these in stock anywhere. They typically come in a few different colors, and I was only able to find just this one that I have here now. So I didn't have any option as far as colors and other things go. You can see here that I'm still carrying this out the front that I bought, the Lightning Elite. I've been trying to give this a fair test by carrying it every day and using it as much as possible. Of course, using it for something like that, cutting tape, isn't doing much. But I have put it through some other harder uses, including cutting some heavy-duty plastic straps off of some binding on some T-posts and things like that. So anyway, this is not about that knife, but just mentioning it since it was in the frame. So the Petrified fish, this is my first time getting one of these, like I said, so I don't know what to expect in the presentation. The box, I have to say, is nice, having the little sleeve that came off, and it's nothing super fancy, but it's nice. I see here that, kind of like the Civivis, they do come with a cleaning cloth. It's always a nice touch to have one of those. I mean, I've got tons of them laying around now, but I still appreciate the thought. And then the knife itself comes in a bag here, resealable. Again, little details that really don't matter, but they're nice touches. They give you the feeling of maybe a little bit higher quality. This is a little bit interesting. I've not had a knife yet that came with a tag through the lanyard hole like this. So that's kind of a nice touch. It just has the Petrified fish logo and name. on the little cardboard tag, and of course it's attached here to this. So I don't know if this is something I can open without having to cut it off. Yeah, it's possible maybe there is a way to release that, but we're just going to go with the cut. So this is the knife. Again, it's really the blade shape as we open it up here and you get a chance to look at that is what kind of attracted me to it. It was a little bit different design. I would say maybe almost a Persian influence on that. And I thought that was kind of cool. I don't have any folding knives that have that drastic of a design, I don't think, at this point. So I thought, well, let's go ahead and pick one of those up. So before we go too far into it, I do want to go ahead and cover some specs on this thing, and we'll check those out. And then, of course, we'll go ahead and continue looking at the knife. But the first thing you got to do before you even get to the specs is open the knife up, take a look at it, and see how this action works. So I can say that the knife looks fairly well centered. Just glancing at that at this point, you can see there that it looks fairly well centered. I don't really have any complaints on that. Seems to open fairly well. Nothing super amazing there, but it's definitely smooth. It's not rough in any way. And you can see there the design I was talking about on that blade shape. All right, so I want to go ahead and get into some specs, kind of keep this thing in order. As far as what this is supposed to be, it's supposed to be a 3.85-inch blade. And we're going to go ahead and just double check those measurements and make sure that that's more or less right. So they're saying 3.85, and that looks right to me. The overall length is supposed to be 8.66, which again looks right to me. So I would say that those measurements are right. So just a little bit under 4 inches. It's not too much under 4 inches on the blade, and a little over 8.5 overall. It does have G10 handle scales, but this is an interesting G10, I've got to say. It's not like just every other G10 that I've seen. And so as we look at the knife and kind of go into the ergonomics and stuff, we'll touch on that a little bit, I think. This does have ball bearings as far as the action there in the pivot. So that is what leads to that smooth flipper action. This is not, it is definitely smooth. I don't want to give the wrong impression, but it's not the smoothest opening knife that I've ever had either. I can feel that it is definitely smooth, but I've had knives that fly open much faster and with a little more authority than that does. However, in no way does that detract from it. It is definitely a smooth knife. So it's not really a negative, just stating that I do have knives that open a little faster with a little more authority and maybe a little smoother than even this is. Okay, so that's the ball bearing. Of course, it is a liner lock. Now, just looking at that right there, it doesn't look like super deep engagement on that liner lock. In fact, it's fairly shallow engagement on the liner lock. So I do think that I will be probably doing a couple spine whacks on this thing just to test it, just light ones to make sure that that thing's not going to close on my hand. Generally, I found that's not the case. Most liner locks, even if they don't look super engaged, typically for everyday use, they're sufficient for keeping the blade from closing on your hand inadvertently. So I don't think we have to, I really don't think I'll have to worry about that too much. I can see as I look in there and kind of roll it back and forth, I don't know if the camera can catch it, but I can see that those are kind of skeletonized liners in there, which should help reduce the weight of the knife a little bit. Also, you can see here that it does come with a deep carry pocket clip, so that is always a nice touch. However, on this one, it does not look like it is reversible or well, it's removable, but it's not reversible in any way. You can't change the orientation up, down, left, right. You're stuck with what you got, which is a right hand tip up carry, which doesn't bother me. I've never been one who really cares which direction the knife is facing as far as the belt clip and all that. I will also mention that I noticed there that it is not flush mounted screws. The screw heads do stick up past where the belt clip is, which is interesting considering it does look like they recessed the belt clip itself. So they notched out a spot in the G10 for that to sit so that the belt clip sits, or the pocket clip sits flush. but then they didn't bother to put flathead screws in. So that really makes no sense to me why you would go ahead and recess the G10 so that you have a flush mount on the pocket clip, and then you put screw heads that stick up way past the flush mounted clip. I've seen that before on other knives too, and I've never really understood that. If you're going to go that extra step to recess the clip, you might as well go ahead and put a flush screw in there. The other screws seem to be mounted okay. They don't really stick out. This one's actually recessed a little bit. This one does actually stick out just a little bit above the G10, so you can feel it there. And this one, of course, the belt clip or pocket clip's going to kind of cover that anyway, but it also sticks out just a little bit, but not anything that'll create a hot spot. So those are the specifications of it. As far as this knife's intended use or purpose, I mean, I would say definitely, obviously, just from the size of it, being a pocket knife in this size, it still lands in that everyday carry use capacity. You've got a nice belly on this blade. It should make a fairly decent slicer. It's fairly thick, but the grind does go up pretty high here. It's a pretty high flat grind on that. So it looks like it's fairly thin behind the edge, and you can see that on that point, how thin that point goes. That's pretty thin on the cutting edge behind that edge. So I do think that it will probably make a pretty decent slicer. And it does feel like it definitely comes razor sharp. I guess just to show you what we've got, I can slice some paper here. Clearly, do some curves there on the paper, no problem whatsoever. It's definitely very, very sharp. So I do like that. It's always disappointing when you get a brand new knife and the thing needs sharpened right out of the box. So I do appreciate that extra effort to make sure that it comes razor sharp. So intended use, yeah. All that being said, I think that definitely, it clearly, most knives on this channel are going to be that way, especially the folding knives. They're an everyday carry knife. Now, how well this fits that intended purpose or use, that's going to be kind of for you to decide. A lot of people aren't going to want to carry this aggressive of a blade shape for an everyday carry knife, just because it might freak some people out when you flip that open and it's got that kind of aggressive shape on the blade. It's also a little bit longer blade. It gets up close to that 4-inch mark. So some people for everyday carry don't like to carry something quite that long. Usually it's more 3.5 inches is kind of typically what people tend to carry. I personally prefer a larger knife, so I'm perfectly fine with that. And also, within reason, I don't really care about the scare factor or the blade shape. As long as it's reasonable, then it's not on me to worry about if someone else is getting freaked out just because I'm opening a knife and using it the way it was intended to be used. But I say that within reason. I mean, I have some knives that are much larger, longer blades, and while I do carry them, I am pretty cognizant of what's going on around me before I whip those things out, because I'm not trying to freak anybody out. So, that's something that you have to be aware of. But as far as this knife goes, I don't think it's so excessive that would necessarily be the case. So if you wanted to everyday carry this knife, you could definitely do it. It's got, good blade steel, which we'll go ahead and transition into that. The blade itself is made out of D2, and you can see there on the knife the D2, and then also it's got that PF939 or the model number on the blade as well. D2 is a very good workhorse steel. So that is a steel that many of you are probably familiar with at this time. It holds a good edge. It can take a pretty decent beating. The only really downside to it for a budget steel, and that's the thing, is this is now considered, D2 is now considered a budget steel. It's in a lot of these budget knives. And that is what's so amazing for the knife community right now, is you're getting good steel in budget knives. This is a decent steel, and it'll hold an edge, like I said, for a good long while. It's not incredibly difficult to sharpen. It's a little harder than some of your softer steels that you get in most budget knives. But the trade-off there is you do hold an edge longer. And I just think that D2 is a great steel. The one downside to it is not stainless. So you have to be aware of that, and you got to make sure you take care of your blade. It is kind of what you might classify as a semi-stainless, so it's not going to rust just super easily, but you definitely don't want to be putting it away wet or stuff all over the blade, because it will rust. Now, the nice thing about this blade is it does have a coating on it, so that should help kind of minimize or negate that factor. But I don't know anything about this coating, so I don't know whether that coating is actually going to hold up to use or whether that's going to all start peeling off basically when you use the knife. So time will have to tell on that. But overall, love the blade steel, love the blade shape. It's a little different. You know, when you have a lot of knives in your collection, you're always kind of keeping your eye out for something that's just a little bit different than what you already have. And I think this fits that bill for me. As far as the ergonomics, when we get into ergonomics, of course, we're going to have to talk about the handle material here, which is this G10, which of course we're all familiar with G10, but this is a much different G10 than what I've seen before. It's almost got like this very coarse, almost like a burlap type material under, or canvas type material under there. So I know they say that it's G10. It almost feels more like a burlap, or not burlap, but like a canvas micarta type feeling. So I don't know if they just, I'm assuming they just textured it that way to give it that feel, but they did a pretty good job of mimicking it then, because it definitely has a much more sticky, tacky, grippy feel, which is what I'm used to getting with micarta instead of the G10. So I got to say, I do like that. I don't know how I feel about the look. It's okay. I mean, I don't think it looks bad. It doesn't visually grab me either, but you can kind of see there that that pattern or design that kind of looks like a thick weave, right? And so that's what gives it that kind of almost micarta type feeling in the hand. So it definitely has good grip to it. I like that. It's grippy. It sticks in the hand. As far as overall ergonomics, a couple complaints I think I might have. It'd be nice to have some jimping here where your thumb rests on the blade. They didn't do that. It's not the end of the world, but it'd be nice to have it there. Additionally, this pocket clip kind of sticks out pretty far from the actual handle. So when I'm grabbing it, I can tell if I was really using this knife a lot and putting a lot of force on it in a repetitive way, that would create a hot spot. I could, yeah, I mean, you can see indentations right there in my palm just from gripping it, and I wasn't even gripping it that tight. So that's definitely going to create a hot spot as you're using this knife. So I don't really care for that. I mean, overall, the pocket clip itself, in theory, looks pretty decent. I like the deep carry and all that, like I mentioned, but it definitely is going to create a hot spot. So ergonomics, though, overall, I would give it a decent rating on ergonomics, but I'm not real happy with that pocket clip. Price point on this knife. So when you're looking at a knife, you know, you have to compare what all you're getting to the price point that you're able to pick it up at. So right now, these knives run roughly, if you're able to find them, like I mentioned, they're kind of hard to find right now. It seems like they've sold out, and they must not be kind of continuing this model. So I think I'm assuming when they run out of the stock they have, that's it, because I've noticed dwindling supplies pretty much everywhere, and it's hard to find. But if you can find this, you can expect to pay somewhere between $35 and $40 for the knife. I think that's a reasonable price point for a knife this size with D2 steel, with no real visible issues as far as build quality. Everything seems pretty well machined. Everything's right and tight. Lock up, like I said, I'm not 100% sure about that yet. It doesn't seem like it engages super deep, but I may find that that's okay. And the action on the knife is definitely acceptable. So price point, I don't think that's necessarily a bad price point. I would have liked it to be maybe a little more like 30 instead of closer to 40, but that's nitpicking. I think it's acceptable in the range that it's got. So overall thoughts on the knife, I think I'm going to like it. I like the design on the blade. It's something a little different. You kind of have that really almost like cleaver style, but with more sweep to the blade, and I like that. So I don't know if that's like some kind of a mix between a cleaver and a sax. Like I said, it kind of almost gives me Persian design inspiration behind that blade is kind of what it seems to me. But I don't know. But I like it. I think it's kind of a cool, different design for a knife. Overall, I think I'm going to be pretty happy with this knife for the price that I paid for it. And as far as recommendations, I would say if you can still pick one of these up, and you just like the blade shape, I will say that's like a needle sharp point. That comes to a very, very fine point. So even though this is a pretty beefy knife, you're probably going to have to baby the tip of that thing, because I can't imagine that wouldn't break pretty easily, just because it's so so thin, it's like a needle. Um, but anyway, sorry, a little bit of a side trail there. Overall recommendation, yeah, if this knife appeals to you visually and you can still find one in stock, I would recommend picking it up for the price point. I think that you'll be happy with what you get based on that price point. As far as my first kind of foray into petrified fish, my first exposure to one of their knives, I'm pretty satisfied with it. I do feel like it's kind of right there with like the Sativians that I've done reviews on, and the Sativians are about $10 cheaper than these, or depending on the model, maybe $15 cheaper. So I don't know what I see about it that would necessarily give me an inclination to pick one of these up over a Sativian, but I will say that I still think that it's a pretty decent price point for the knife and what you get. So if it does appeal to you visually and you can find one, absolutely pick it up. I think you'll be happy with it.